printed note wrong. It's me. All right, let's get started again. And so we've only got 15 minutes before lunch, and we had a quick presentation of an interest from Mr. Gastner. I'll invite him up. That has come to our attention with regard to some of our statutes related to insurance. And remember, we had some good legislation last year related to insurance and digital assets, and then we had the insurance sandbox that regrettably didn't end up crossing the full finish line. That might be convenient, but I just wanted to take a minute to raise an issue with our statute and ask Mr. Gastner to present that to us as something that we might want to consider. So please introduce yourself, Mr. Gastner, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for slotting me in at short notice. Hopefully this is an interesting couple of minutes. I'd like to put something, hopefully exciting and new on your radar. My name is Max Gastner. I'm a technologist and the co-founder of Standard Assets Incorporated. We are currently pursuing an insurance license in Bermuda, and we expect that in the near future, we will be the world's first completely Bitcoin-denominated life insurance company. What that means in practice is we take premiums in Bitcoin, we make our investments in Bitcoin, we hold our statutory reserves in Bitcoin, we state our financials in Bitcoin for our regulator, and ultimately when our customers die, hopefully that takes a long time, we pay our claims in Bitcoin. And what that means crucially is that our assets and liabilities are matched. Whether Bitcoin goes up against the dollar or down against the dollar doesn't affect the adequacy of our capital or our reserving, since our investments are in Bitcoin and so are the claims we're eventually going to pay. So that's the one way in which we are very different and novel, but from every other perspective, it's a very vanilla life insurance company. And I'm here today because we would really like nothing more than to domicile a de novo insurance company in Wyoming. Thanks to the committee's leadership, Wyoming is ahead of the curve on every aspect of digital assets regulation, including insurance. The Division of Banking has signed a memorandum of understanding with our Bermuda regulator around information sharing for regulating digital assets companies. And in Wyoming, digital assets are admitted assets for insurance companies already, which means that a dollar-denominated insurance company can hold a small percentage of its investments in Bitcoin, which is appropriate. And a small percentage, I'd emphasize that because there is this volatility risk. And so prudence dictates that if you're dollar-denominated, you really should hold only a small percentage of your assets and things that are volatile relative to the dollar. But the same principle implies that for a company denominated in Bitcoin, we should hold only a very small percentage of our assets in dollars since it's volatile in the other direction. As you all know, insurance regulation in the US is on a 50-state basis, and we think there's an opportunity for Wyoming here to really lead the way on digital asset insurance in the United States, building on the early distinctiveness in banking and trusts to also become a hub for insurance businesses and the people who work for them. I don't think we're the only folks looking for a state to move first on this. If you look at the innovative insurers starting up in Bermuda, there's a ton of them doing all kinds of really interesting stuff. You'll find a ton of businesses that are offshore by necessity, but who would really like to be able to find an onshore home. And I think Wyoming and Bermuda are attractive for a lot of the same reasons, both very strong free market states, both burgeoning hubs for blockchain expertise, no personal income tax or corporate tax. So I hope you guys will continue to break new ground for appropriately prudent regulated financial innovation. Obviously, from where I sit, which is biased, I think insurance is the next big opportunity, and would love the chance to kind of bring that before you guys. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gastner. I appreciate you being here, and again, appreciate you coming up here on short notice as you did and presenting this. Committee, any questions?
Mr. Co-Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Gastner?
Yes, thank you.
Have you had a chance to look at our lengthy insurance code?
We have. We've done a pretty detailed review of the insurance code. I think, the code is mostly written with respect to value, questions of value, right? An insurance contract involves a risk transfer, and there's considerations in value, and then you get some kind of some kind of insurance benefit back when the event occurs. But I think it's more a question of clarifying that you can strike insurance contracts in, that are not denominated in dollars. There may be a few places where there's interaction with other parts of statute that do just say dollars. And then on the other side, there is this admitted assets question, right? Where what you've sort of allowed is for dollar companies to hold a small amount of digital assets, but then the code doesn't really contemplate a company that transacts entirely in digital assets and has limited or $0 exposure. So I'd say those are probably the two things.
Mr. Coach.
Go ahead.
Okay, so if it were as simple as just striking dollars, what are there other types of commodities that are traded in insurance that would come into play as well?
Yeah, I think it's mostly a question of currencies. So if you think about, there's dollar companies and there's Swiss franc companies and there's euro companies, and in that sense, like a digital assets company is, you can look at it from one perspective is just trading in another currency. As to whether there are insurance contracts that are struck directly in terms of some non-monetary commodity, I would say that's something I'm not 100% certain of, but I would be shocked if in the past there were not examples of that.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Let's go to you, Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask Mr. Gastner, what's the business model? Most insurance companies, they take your money, they then invest it in things that then produce an investment return. Does your company do that also?
Precisely.
Go ahead, Mr. Gastner.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, precisely. It's really no different from any other insurance company. There's, you make an underwriting profit and you make an investment profit, and in every respect, I think really completely standard.
Mr. Chairman, but if that's the case, then some of your assets are investments that would be, dollar denominated, I would think, right? So then on your assets and liabilities, there's a fair amount of your assets that would be dollar denominated. Is that accurate?
Mr. Gastner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. No, so right, the assets are Bitcoin denominated. So that is what's different, is that our investments, whether they're say loans to miners or short-term lending or whatever they may be, are Bitcoin denominated. So if you think about kind of where, so let's suppose that Bitcoin is not a flash in the pan, and that there is going to be a future for digital assets, then there will be a wide range of productive economic activities that are carried out in that, denominated in that currency. And we believe that in that world, as in this world, insurance companies as a long-term provider of capital are going to play a really crucial role. If you think about who owns business, who owns real estate, who owns government bonds, who owns mortgages, a shocking amount of that is insurance companies. I think it's $8 trillion of assets in the United States, something like 20 globally. And that's because insurance companies are going to be around for a really long time, so they can finance stuff that's over the long term. So if you look forward 10, 20, 30 years, as you have to become accustomed to doing when you're talking about life insurance, I think we see ourselves as a player in a lot of those long-term markets, some of which haven't developed yet.
Further questions, Representative Stith? And Mr. Ville, I think you're familiar with this, but you came in only at the end of it. The concept is, and it's similar to what we talked about a few minutes ago about where your risk is carried. And if you're keyed on oil, then you want something that is stable to oil. Mr. Gastner has an interest and will be working through Bermuda on an insurance enterprise that is fully operated in and denominated in Bitcoin. And obviously, if that is the case, and the payouts will be in Bitcoin, then your least risky least risky asset is going to be that which you're denominated in, so Bitcoin. But that would be precluded in Wyoming statute from being a substantial portion of your asset portfolio. I think it's 5%, up to 10% if you're a reinsurer, based on the work that we've done over the years. So what happens, a question I have is what happens if all of your business were actually transacted in Japan and you were working only in yen? You were taking yen, you were paying in yen. How does that look with regard to Wyoming statute right now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a hard question. Obviously for a Japanese insurer, it's very straightforward. Their dollar investments or whatever get an extra risk charge from their regulator. And I think, if you are operating in an offshore context like Bermuda, and you're running a yen denominated business, then they'll just look at the currency mismatches on your balance sheet and charge you appropriately. I don't think that Wyoming statute really contemplates the possibility of an insurer operating in a foreign currency, although there is no reason that I can see why you wouldn't want, assuming someone wanted to domicile a specialty insurer that operated in Swiss francs or in yen here, I don't see that there'd be any reason why you wouldn't want that. I'm not sure. I think this is where it comes down to clarifying that the statute is based on value rather than on dollars. But I think that's a great analogy. There isn't currently, to my knowledge, anyone doing foreign currency denominated like insurance business of any type in Wyoming, but that could be wrong.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Revelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And apologies for missing the beginning of what you said. What is there a tax benefit to operating in Bermuda?
Go ahead, Mr. Gastner.
Bermuda is a great jurisdiction. I would say the first reason why Bermuda is a great jurisdiction for us is that no Bermuda insurance company has ever failed. So it's prudentially, I think, the best regulator in the world. So when you're starting something new, it's very nice to have the assurance that the people who are providing oversight know what they're doing. Bermuda has, like Wyoming, has no individual or corporate tax, but there are no specific tax advantages for the policies being in Bermuda. In fact, it is a disadvantage because as a Bermuda company, you cannot market in the United States. So we can only market offshore. And that's why we, and I think lots of other people, including people who are doing, we're, I think the only life insurance business so far, but there are people who are doing more property and casualty insurance. So cyber insurance, for instance, that's specific to Bitcoin, who are really having problems with the solicitation rules in different places. Being a US domiciled insurer makes that a lot easier because you can market here in Wyoming, where there are a lot of crypto holders, a lot of potential customers, and it's very easy to get to, unlike Bermuda, which of course is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and 1,000 miles from North Carolina or whatever, really far from everything.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Mr. Bill? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding, and I'm no expert on the insurance industry, but it's my understanding that it's a little bit like Delaware in that there is just a muscle memory now amongst those who organize and the attorneys who advise those who organize insurance companies that Bermuda is the place to do it. The tax advantages as insurance companies have become more global and multinational have sort of faded, and there are disadvantages to those who want to market in the United States for being domiciled there. I'm curious, we've already worked, or you all have worked on some legislation around reinsurance statutes here in Wyoming. I'm curious if there is something that the state of Wyoming can do to begin to take away that mind share from Bermuda for those who want to market in the US, and probably more importantly, specifically around digital assets, as is the case here, where we've got some distinct advantages in our legislation and regulation.
Yeah, and I think the key is to get back to the concept that Mr. Gastner mentioned about contemplating risk in terms of the value of the assets instead of the dollar of the assets, and trying to think through how to structure that correctly so that when you have unique circumstances, or you can imagine a circumstance realistically where somebody's 50% in dollars and 50% in Bitcoin as a interesting thought exercise. What's the appropriate risk analysis that our Department of Insurance should be auditing to? Because it isn't necessarily just on a dollar basis or a Bitcoin basis. At that point, they have to be a little bit thoughtful about the joint risk or the risk profile of the aggregate. Go ahead, Mr. Rubin.
Mr. Chairman, in this case, though, don't you have an asset and liability perfect match? Which again is, I think that's what the commission would be looking at in terms of the risk analysis, as long as there's a perfect liability and asset match, and it's an asset that's recognized under state law.
And that's how it should be, but that's not how the statute is written. So therein lies the challenge, is that their assets can only be up to 5%, unless they're reinsured, up to 10%. Non-traditional assets, which includes explicitly in our statutes, digital assets. So even though I think there's no question that our insurance commissioner would say that that's the best from a risk standpoint. And then they'd point to the bit of statute which said, but you can't do that. So I think that's what Mr. Gastner is looking for, is a way that we could restructure that so that when you have this type of circumstance, that you're capable of minimizing your risk instead of just having to denominate in dollars.
I think that's exactly right, Mr. Chairman. And if I may just briefly on the question of mindshare, I think what Bermuda has been able to do, and in a very short time, because really 60 years ago, Bermuda was facing, it was a tourism economy, and jet airliners took that away from them because people could go to the Caribbean instead. So they really were looking for something to do. 60,000 people on a rock. They do not have mineral deposits. They do not have grazing land. And it really, in only 6 years, a population of 60,000, 20,000 of them are accountants, actuaries, and lawyers. The median household income is $150,000 a year.
One more reason not to be there. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I make it sound bad, but it is quite charming. But no, seriously, it's an astonishing success story and it was led by regulation and by the ability of government, the independent regulator, and industry to work together. And basically every innovation in insurance in the last 60 years has come out of Bermuda.
Any follow-up, Mr. Bill?
Just what could Wyoming, maybe I missed this, but what is the ask? What could Wyoming do?
Well, I had a conversation with Mr. Gastner a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, I'm not sure when it was, but on this topic, and I just wanted him to be able to have an opportunity to come tell us about this circumstance. Certainly something that wasn't on my radar previously. I'd never thought about it, but it's within the scope of what we're obviously dealing with, and so we can contemplate this moving forward. I think, again, it's probably too late in the process to have legislation from the committee. We could do an individual bill. We could potentially try and get something drafted if it was quick and short, but the insurance commissioner tends to take a while to review things. I don't know if the committee has any ideas. Please feel free, but at this point, I just wanted to make sure it was on everybody's radar. This is something we can fix. It doesn't cost us to fix it, and it seems to put us in a better position to be a first mover in the space. So those are handy when you have those things that you can bring together. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, it's been a minute since I spent some time in the insurance code from our Sandbox bill, but I think I like the idea of something moving forward with this concept, because I think there was a disconnect last year with what is the need for the insurance sandbox, and what are some of the benefits that can come from it? What is the industry that we're attracting and benefiting? I think there's a lot of conversation to have about that. I have no idea if how simple that fix is, contemplating risk in terms of value, not US dollars. I have no idea what the unintended consequences are to that, what else it opens up. I don't know how complicated that bill is. If it's not a complicated bill to draft now, to have that, there'll be several, at least a month time, depending if it's not complicated for Mr. Hopkinson to put that together. It'd be at least a month or two for the insurance commissioner to be looking at that, getting his thoughts together, to bring them to us in November, to at least continue the conversation. And Mr. Kaufman wants to comment.
All right, Mr. Kaufman, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to interrupt anybody else. I think the way that I was thinking about this, Mr. Chairman, is hopefully it would be incredibly simple. We certainly don't want to usurp, the regulatory discretion of the insurance commissioner and invite a lot of scrutiny on that. But I think the way I was thinking about this is literally a bill that might just simply amend or tweak the definitions in the insurance code, as Mr. Gastner has suggested, that maybe just slightly expands it from right? Dollars to value or something that doesn't exclude, right? Digital assets under Wyoming law. So that it's, I think it's a very subtle change. So I just wanted to point that out to the committee that in terms of contemplating legislation going forward, I agree, undertaking to, rework the insurance code would be a nightmare. But a very subtle change, making this permissible for the insurance commissioner to consider, I think would be pretty easy to do.
We can reach out. Obviously, we don't have the commissioner here. We would need to.
Oh, I'm sure he would.
Love to be here. I think he really enjoyed it all last year when we had him here, so we could definitely bring him back. Any other thoughts? Mr. Ville, go ahead.
The only thing that I would point out to Co-Chairman Olson's comment about our last draft is that was reinsurance, which carries less of a regulatory burden, I think, than when you're dealing with consumer facing life. It's
The insurance bill.
Yeah.
And then we had an insurance sandbox bill.
Yeah, the insurance sandbox bill was.
Oh, you're talking about the Sandbox.
Yeah.
bill.
I'm talking about the sandbox.
I
bill, yeah, which was
apologize.
Which
Yeah.
was broader and meant to contemplate ingenuity in the insurance industry.
Right. Innovation.
Innovation.
Yeah.
Innovation in the.
Well, we could certainly get this on the agenda if everyone's interested. I'm interested in hearing more and hearing from the commissioner and honestly looking at the statute and seeing if this is a 2-word change. Yay. If this is we redo all of those things that we were working on last year, then we're probably going to need more time, but
In the time that we've spoken, Mr. Hopkinson, have you reviewed the 600 pages of the insurance code?
just a one-liner.
Mr. Chairman, I have not, oddly enough, but I guess my initial question for the commissioner, of course, would be, would this jeopardize the NAIC
Yeah.
accreditation? Because that's going to kill it right there.
Right. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, well.
Yes,
All right. Well,
I remember.
that is a good first question. Yeah, he was very reticent to kill the NAIC accreditation. Wonder why. All right. All right. Well, with that, it is lunchtime. Thank you, Mr. Gastner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's investigate a little bit more and see how things turn out at the next meeting. It'll give us a good opportunity to chat with the commissioner. And with that, let's break for lunch until 1:30. See you.